I woke to the sound of something scraping across the frozen ground outside my window. The sound was slow, deliberate, like claws dragging through ice-hardened earth, searching for something buried beneath the snow. My breath caught in my throat as I lay there in the darkness, listening, waiting. When the scraping stopped, something began breathing, deep, patient, far too close to the house. You know that feeling when you sense eyes on you in the dark? When every instinct screams that you're being watched, even though you can see nothing? Multiply that by 100. That's what it felt like lying there, frozen in my bed, while something unknown stood just beyond the thin wooden wall separating us. By morning, something had changed in my village. Homes felt emptier, though everyone was still there. Streets felt quieter, though people still walked them, and no one could explain why. It was as if the entire village had taken a collective breath and forgotten to exhale. My name is Ioan Rusu. I am 79 years old, recovering from a serious illness in a hospital bed in Brasov. The doctors tell me I'm doing better now, that I have time left. The medication helps with the pain, but it doesn't help with the weight of what I've carried for most of my life. Before my time runs out, I need to tell you the story that was never supposed to be told. Welcome to Dark Werewolf Encounters, where legends come alive and the night hides things that should never be seen. The following story is a work of fiction inspired by folklore and oral legends. This is the story of the winter of 1955, of the thing we discovered lurking in the Carpathian forests, and of the oath 7 men took to bury the truth forever. An oath I am now breaking. You might wonder why I would choose to speak now, after 70 years of silence. Why not keep this secret as I promised? The answer is simple, though it took me decades to understand it. Silence is sometimes more dangerous than the truth. And some secrets, when buried too deep, grow roots. The village of Werewolf lies deep in a Carpathian valley, cradled by mountains so ancient they seem to remember when the world was young. Forests surround us on all sides. Dense, dark, primeval forests that feel alive even in winter. The trees there grow so thick that sunlight barely penetrates, creating a perpetual twilight beneath their canopy. Even now, 70 years later, only one paved road leads out of the valley. It winds through the mountains like a serpent, treacherous in winter, sometimes impassable for weeks when the snows come heavy. 300 people live in Werewolf, perhaps fewer now. We know each other's names, histories, and bloodlines stretching back generations. Every family can trace their roots in this valley for hundreds of years. That's what made it so much worse when we realized one of us was different. It began in December of 1955, though the seeds of what happened had been planted long before I was born. I was 16 years old that winter, apprenticing under my father in his forge. My hands were still soft, not yet calloused from years of hammer work. I was eager to prove myself, to become a man in my father's eyes. The snow came early that year. By November, it had already piled high enough to bury fences and obscure familiar paths. The forest seemed to press closer to the village, its dark edges creeping inward, as if the trees were slowly marching toward us while we slept. The first sign that something was wrong came with the livestock. Old Vasily's sheep began disappearing. He kept them in a sturdy pen behind his house, reinforced against wolves and bears. Yet each morning he would find the gate hanging open, not broken, but unlatched from the inside, and another sheep gone. Only scattered wool remained, caught on the fence posts and tracks in the snow. Those tracks troubled me even then. They were too large to belong to any wolf I'd ever seen, too uneven, as if whatever made them had been changing size as it walked. In some places they looked almost like bare human footprints, elongated and distorted. In others they resembled the paws of some massive predator. The local hunters examined the tracks and said nothing, but I saw the way they glanced at each other, the unspoken concern that passed between them. Then on a bitter cold evening in mid-December, young Mariana Popescu failed to return home. She was 14, the daughter of the village school teacher. She had gone to fetch water from the stream before sunset, a simple errand, one she had done 1,000 times before. When darkness fell and she hadn't returned, her father organized a search party. They found her scarf the next morning, frozen stiff near the stream. But Mariana was gone. The footprints leading to the scarf were the same as those we'd seen around Vasile's sheep pen. They approached from the forest, circled the area where her scarf lay, then simply ended, as if the ground itself had swallowed both the girl and whatever had taken her. The search parties combed the forest for days. Men I'd known my entire life, strong men who feared nothing, returned from those woods with haunted expressions. They spoke little of what they'd seen or felt out there, but I noticed how their hands trembled when they thought no one was watching. The trees answered our calls for Mariana with only silence. After that, unspoken rules took hold of our village like frost creeping across a window pane. No one went out after dark, not for any reason. Doors were reinforced with iron bars and additional locks. Windows stayed shuttered even during the day, transforming homes into dim fortresses. Garlic hung above every threshold. Silver crosses, some of them family heirlooms that hadn't been worn in generations, appeared around necks and over doorways. You might think these precautions superstitious, foolish. But when something that isn't entirely human stalks your village, superstition becomes survival. The incidents continued through January, each one adding another layer of dread to our daily lives. Animals fled their enclosures in blind panic, sometimes injuring themselves in their desperation to escape. People spoke in hushed voices of footsteps outside their homes after midnight, too heavy to be human, too deliberate to be animal. One elderly woman, Domna Aldea, was found one morning in her locked bedroom, unharmed but shaken, whispering about eyes that had watched her through the darkness. Eyes that reflected the moonlight like polished gold. We never saw it clearly. Only shapes between trees when we dared to look out our windows at night. Shadows that moved wrong, flowing like water instead of walking like flesh and bone. And the sounds, footsteps that were almost human but not quite, breathing too deep to belong to anything with lungs our size, and sometimes, worst of all, a low sound that was neither growl nor voice, but something in between. A searching presence that felt intelligent, aware. It was learning us, learning our patterns, our routines, our weaknesses. By late January, many families had packed what they could carry and fled the valley. They told themselves they were visiting relatives in Brasov or Bucharest, that they would return when spring came. But we all knew the truth. They were running from something they couldn't name, something that had turned our ancestral home into a place of fear. Those of us who stayed, whether from stubbornness, poverty, or something deeper, took turns watching the village at night. We stood in the bitter cold, gripping lanterns that seemed pathetically small against the darkness, holding old rifles that we weren't entirely sure would help. We flinched at every sound, seeing threats in every shadow. The thing in the forest did not leave. If anything, its presence grew stronger, more confident. My father was the first to speak the word aloud. We were alone in the forge when he finally did. The fire had burned low, and shadows stretched along the stone walls like grasping fingers. I was supposed to be learning to temper a blade, but my hands were shaking too much to hold the hammer steady. "Your grandfather told me about a winter like this," my father said quietly, his eyes fixed on the dying coals. "It was before the First War. People vanished. Animals were found destroyed. A hunter came from Transylvania to help. I waited, not daring to speak. He told me it was a varkalak, a werewolf. The word felt dangerous just to hear, as if speaking it aloud might summon the very thing we feared. But once said, it hung in the air between us like smoke, impossible to ignore. My father told me that the hunter had tracked it once before, years earlier, in a different village, that it had been one of the villagers there, someone known, someone loved, someone who had hidden their condition for years. The hunter hadn't been able to stop it permanently. He said he couldn't bring himself to end it completely, knowing the creature was still partially human. Instead, he had forced it to flee deep into the mountains, where it wouldn't threaten anyone. "The affliction runs in bloodlines," my father said, finally looking at me. His eyes held a weight I'd never seen before. "It sleeps for generations, dormant in the blood. Then it wakes, sometimes in children, sometimes in adults. There's no pattern to it, no way to predict when or in whom it will surface." That night, he called a secret meeting in the church basement. 7 men attended: my father, the priest, the mayor, 2 of the oldest hunters, the village doctor, and the school teacher who had lost his daughter. I wasn't meant to be there, but I had followed my father, hidden myself in the confessional, and listened through the wooden screen as they discussed what must be done. My father showed them a journal, an old leather-bound book that had belonged to the hunter from Transylvania. Its pages were filled with family trees, annotations in faded ink, warnings passed down through generations. Some of the family names I recognized. They were families from our village, bloodlines I'd known my entire life. These families carry the affliction, my father said, his finger tracing the branches of the family trees. It can surface in children or in adults. There's no pattern, no warning, but the hunter believed that certain signs could be observed in those who were changing. They argued for hours. The doctor insisted there had to be a medical explanation, some disease or condition that could explain what was happening. The priest spoke of spiritual causes and traditional remedies. The hunters wanted to organize a hunt, to track the creature and end the threat. But my father was adamant. If it is one of us, he said, then we cannot simply hunt it down like an animal. They are still human, still our neighbor, our friend, perhaps even our family. Finally, they agreed to watch the families marked in the journal. Quietly, carefully, looking for signs of the affliction awakening. For weeks, nothing happened. The village held its breath, waiting. The attacks stopped. The presence in the forest seemed to fade. Some people began to hope that whatever had plagued us had moved on, that the nightmare was ending. Then came the new moon. I woke to shouting, not the panic screams of fear, but urgent calls of alarm. Firelight flickered across the snow outside my window as people ran between buildings, carrying torches and lanterns. I dressed quickly and rushed outside, my heart pounding. And in that chaos, I saw something I still struggle to describe 70 years later. A massive shape moved between the houses. It was too tall to be a man, even one standing on something, too fluid in its movements, flowing rather than walking. But it wasn't entirely animal either. It moved with purpose, with intelligence. Its eyes, those terrible eyes, reflected the firelight with an awareness that was unmistakably human. Someone fired a rifle. The sharp crack echoed through the valley like thunder. The creature recoiled. For just a moment, it stood fully illuminated in the torchlight, and I saw it clearly. The form was wrong, caught between man and beast, belonging fully to neither world. Then it turned and vanished into the forest with impossible speed. A group of hunters, my father among them, followed the trail. I ran with them, driven by something I couldn't name. We tracked it through the snow, following footprints that changed from human to animal and back again. The trail led us deep into the forest, up into the lower slopes of the mountains. And then, without warning, the track simply ended. Not at a cliff or a stream, not at any natural boundary. They just stopped in the middle of a small clearing, as if whoever made them had simply ceased to exist. We searched the area for hours as dawn broke, and that's when we found Andre Christian. He was lying in the snow about 100 yards from where the tracks ended, alive but barely conscious, exposed to the cold and trembling violently. He wore only his nightclothes, his feet bare and injured from the cold. He was 23 years old, the priest's nephew, engaged to be married to a sweet girl from a neighboring village. He had been part of the night watch, one of those standing guard when the creature appeared. We carried him back to the church, wrapped in blankets, his skin pale as the snow. My father sent everyone else away and gathered only the 7 men who had met in secret. Andre woke hours later. When he opened his eyes and saw us standing around him, he didn't look confused or disoriented. He looked at us with unbearable clarity, with a knowledge that seemed to age him decades in an instant. I remember, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Everything. What he told us in the hours that followed changed everything I thought I knew about the world. He spoke of the changes that had been happening to him for months, dreams of running through the forest with heightened senses, of unusual hunger, of urges that had nothing to do with normal appetites. He had thought he was going mad, that the stress of the disappearances and the fear in the village had broken something in his mind. Then came the physical changes, his senses sharpening painfully, his skin becoming more sensitive, his muscles cramping and reforming. A fever that came and went with the phases of the moon. "The new moon is the worst," he said, tears streaming down his face. "When there's no light to anchor me to my human form, the affliction takes over completely. I'm still there, still aware, but I'm trapped inside, watching, unable to stop what it makes me do." He described the sensation of transformation, not as pain. Though there was pain, but as a loss of self, like drowning in something ancient and hungry that lived in his blood. His human mind would retreat to a small, quiet corner while something else took control. Something that thought in instincts and urges rather than words and reason. "The girl," he whispered. "Mariana. I didn't harm her permanently. It took her deep into the mountains, to a cave. She's there still, I think, alive but changed. It was trying to create a companion, someone like itself." The doctor left immediately with two of the hunters. They found the cave Andre described. They found Mariana, alive but deeply traumatized, her mind affected by whatever she had experienced. It took months of care to bring her back to herself, and even then, she was never quite the same. She lives in a convent now, I believe, tending gardens and keeping silence. But that night in the church, we faced a difficult choice. "I can't stop it," Andre said, looking at each of us in turn. "I've tried. The changes are becoming harder to fight, lasting longer, and the part of me that's still human is getting smaller each time. But I can leave," he continued. "I can go where I won't hurt anyone, where I can learn to control it, or at least contain it." The priest spoke up then. "There is a monastery," he said slowly, "high in the mountains, beyond the last villages. They take in men who are burdened, men afflicted by things that can't be spoken of in the modern world. Ancient things." That night, the 7 men made their decision. They swore an oath on the Bible, on their families, on everything they held sacred, that the truth of what happened would never be spoken. That Andre's secret would be protected, that the knowledge of the affliction would be buried. The journal was destroyed, burned in the forge where my father and I had worked. The ashes scattered, records were altered, mentions of the attacks were removed from official documents. The story we told the village was carefully constructed. Andre had suffered a mental break from the stress and trauma of the winter. He had been sent away for treatment. Mariana had gotten lost in the woods, exposed to the cold, her mind damaged by the ordeal. People accepted the story because they wanted to believe it, because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. Andre left before dawn the next day. I watched him go from my window, a solitary figure trudging through the snow toward the mountains, carrying nothing but a small pack. The priest's blessing followed him like a prayer. The village slowly returned to normal. Spring came. The snows melted. Life continued. The secret stayed buried for 70 years. I married a good woman. We had 3 children together. I took over my father's forge and spent decades shaping metal, creating useful things, living an ordinary life in an ordinary village. The other 6 men who swore the oath passed away one by one over the years. None of us spoke of that winter again, not even to each other. But secrets don't die. They wait. They sleep in the blood, just like the affliction itself. 5 years ago, my grandson began having nightmares. His name is Mihai. He was 10 years old when it started. Dreams of forests, he said. Dreams of running on all 4s through the trees, feeling the wind, tasting the night air. Dreams of a hunger he couldn't name or understand. My daughter dismissed it as an active imagination. The doctors said it was normal childhood anxiety, perhaps exacerbated by too many scary stories. But I knew. I saw the signs that I had been trained to see so many years ago. The way Mihai's eyes would track a movement with unnatural precision. How he would sometimes stop mid-conversation, his head tilting like a dog hearing a distant sound. The restlessness that took hold of him as the moon waned. As he grew older, the signs became harder to ignore. Sleepwalking, Finding him in the morning curled up in the garden, his night clothes covered in dirt and leaves. The way he was drawn to the forest, spending hours at its edge, staring into the darkness between the trees with an expression of longing. The long silences he would fall into beneath the full moon, his eyes distant and golden. I tried to deny it, told myself I was seeing patterns that weren't there, that the trauma of that winter so long ago had made me paranoid. But denial is a luxury you can't afford when you've seen what I've seen. When Mihai turned 14, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I took him aside one evening, just the two of us, and I told him everything. I broke the oath I had sworn 70 years earlier. I told him about Andrei Christian, about the affliction that ran in certain bloodlines, about the winter of 1955 and the 7 men who had tried to bury the truth. The relief that crossed his face was immediate and profound. I thought I was losing my mind, he said, tears streaming down his cheeks. I thought there was something wrong with me, something broken that I couldn't fix. But it's real. It's real, and I'm not crazy. We told his parents. My daughter wanted to deny it, wanted to believe there was some other explanation. But my son-in-law, practical and level-headed, simply asked, "What do we do?" I remembered the monastery the priest had spoken of. I made inquiries, careful and discreet. The place still existed, though it was even more remote now than it had been 70 years ago. We took Mihai there on a cold autumn day. The monks who greeted us at the gate seemed to be expecting us, though we had sent no word ahead. They welcomed my grandson with a kind of sad understanding that suggested they had done this many times before. They showed us their library. Journals filled the shelves, dozens upon dozens of them. Stories written by men who carried the same burden, who had come to the monastery seeking not a cure, but understanding, control, a way to live with what they were without hurting others. One of the oldest journals bore a name I recognized, Andrei Christian. The monk who showed it to me said that Andrei had lived at the monastery for over 40 years. He had learned to manage the affliction, to predict and prepare for the transformations. He had devoted his life to studying the condition, documenting everything he learned in the hope of helping others who came after him. He had passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, having harmed no one after that terrible winter. He left instructions, the monk said, for if anyone from Werewolf ever came seeking answers. He said to tell them that the affliction is not a punishment. It is a burden, yes, a terrible burden. But it doesn't make you a monster. The choices you make determine what you are. Mihai stayed at the monastery. He comes home to visit sometimes during periods when the affliction is quieter. He's learning to live with it, to manage it. The monks teach him meditation techniques, help him understand the patterns of his transformation, and give him tools to maintain his humanity even when the beast is strong. He will never be cured, but he will never be alone. Now I write this from my hospital bed, my hands shaking with more than just age and illness. The medication makes everything soft around the edges, but it doesn't dull the sharpness of memory. I have broken my oath. I have told you the story that was supposed to stay hidden with me and the other 6 men. And I have done so deliberately, carefully, because I have learned something in my 79 years. Silence protects no one. It only allows the darkness to grow deeper, the fear to become more powerful. The affliction did not end. It sleeps in bloodlines, waiting, perhaps in families who don't even know they carry it. But now the truth exists beyond the confines of 7 men in a remote monastery. If someone hears this story and recognizes themselves in it, if you have experienced the dreams, the hunger, the changes that can't be explained, know this. You are not alone. You are not imagining it. And silence is not the answer. Some places can help people who understand. You don't have to face this burden in isolation. Don't have to fear that you're losing your mind or becoming a monster. The affliction is real, but so is hope. My name is Ioan Rusu. I kept a secret for most of my life, carried it like a weight on my chest, felt it pressing down on me with every breath. I watched it nearly destroy my grandson before I found the courage to break my oath. And now, with what little time I have left, I have done what I should have done 70 years ago. I have told the truth. The nurse is coming now. She'll give me more medication and help me rest. Outside my window, night settles over Brasov. In the distance, the Carpathian Mountains rise, their peaks white with snow. Somewhere in those mountains, in a monastery whose location I will not share, my grandson learns to live with what he is, learns to be human despite the beast in his blood. Somewhere in those same mountains, perhaps, other secrets wait. Other stories that have never been told, but this one at least is free now. And so am I. This has been Dark Werewolf Encounters. Remember, the line between legend and reality is thinner than you think. The stories we tell ourselves in the safety of daylight may hold more truth than we dare imagine. Until next time, keep your eyes on the shadows and listen carefully to the stories the old ones tell. Because sometimes the most terrifying tales are the ones that were never meant to be shared.